If you came to see Munya Chihuahua, you've missed him. But welcome. It's lovely to see you all here. I'm Ranvir Singh, journalist and TV presenter. I came straight from the Good Morning Britain studios this morning. And of course, this is Dr. Chris van Tulleken, and we're going to be talking to you for the next hour and a bit. But one of the, it was interesting because it was topical, because one of the discussion points, amongst many others this morning on the show, was actually about what the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak responded last night to a question in one of his political interviews, of course, during this campaign. The question last night asked to him was, what would make the British public like you again? His answer was this: I actually have an appalling diet because I eat an enormous amount of sugar, and I'm very unhealthy in that regard. And he went on to say it surprises people how many Haribos and Twixes he gets through in the campaign. And I thought, what an interesting insight that is. From the Prime Minister during a campaign, what will make me, his immediate leap of thought, what makes me relatable, what makes me likeable, what makes me feel like I'm just like you, is a shit diet. Is eating ultra-processed food.
And an incredible indictment of someone like me as someone who's not relatable, as someone who's snobby and wants to take away your Kit Kats and Twixes and Haribos.
Scrooge.
Yeah, Scrooge, right.
But it made me think, Chris, actually, that whoever walks in to number 10 Downing Street on the 5th of July probably needs to make it a priority to watch your feature-length documentary, which is the one we're here to talk about. It's under the working title Irresistible, and it goes to the heart, Chris van Tulleken, doctor, TV broadcaster, of your mission. You've been on our TVs for over a decade now. Look, before we get into the nuts and bolts of Irresistible, the documentary, what is the central mission of it, and your mission now?
I think when people watch this film, I want them to understand one single concept, which is that diet-related disease, but particularly obesity, is commerciogenic. It is driven by commercial incentives in exactly the same way that lung cancer is commerciogenic. The pandemic of lung cancer is caused by commercial incentives. And that's the kind of core message of the film. And it's very well evidenced, it's incontrovertibly true.
And when you say commercialization, what was the word?
It's commerciogenic. So
commerciogenic.
This is the word we use to talk about the malnutrition that was widely talked about in the 70s, caused by baby food being marketed in very low-income countries and children dying as a result.
And in layman's terms, is that the food environment?
The food environment, right. So the industry creates the food environment, and it is the food environment that drives particularly obesity.
And this is, I would say, a controversial point of view still, which is the central belief that you have is that obesity is caused by the food environment and not by the individual. And I would say, talking about these issues sometimes on GMB, the feedback you get is still, that's why I think your point of view remains controversial to many, many people, that it's not the individual's fault.
This is the hill I will die on, and I will argue this to the end, that you have approximately as much control over the food you eat as you do over how much air you breathe, or the quality of the air you breathe, or the water that you drink. You know, it is our diets, and there may be this minuscule number of people, and some of them will be in this room for whom there is an exception, but basically our diets are controlled by our food.
Okay, so the messages we have had in our entire lifetimes, as far as I can tell, do more exercise and use your willpower.
Use your willpower.
Why are those two things a lie?
Well, let's talk about what doesn't cause obesity, because the diet-related disease, there's a huge number of diet-related disease. Diet-related disease is now the leading cause of early death on planet Earth for humans and for animals, of course. But obesity is what draws us all in, because we're all struggling with it, or the vast majority of us are struggling with it. So when I was writing the book, the question I had was, if I'm talking about obesity, and it's not a book just about obesity, but that is a big part of it. When I talk about food, am I talking about half the problem, 60%, 70% of the problem? Because clearly, a big part of the issue must be that we all sit playing computer games, we sit in offices, we're not out ploughing fields, climbing mountains, walking to work anymore. So inactivity seemed very obvious. And what I kind of discovered, and I think it's the most elegant chapter in the book, is that the entire... Can we put up the slide, actually? So there is a widely held belief. Who's heard this phrase, exercise is medicine? You've all heard this. What you'll notice is there's a trademark here. This was a global health initiative by the American College of Sports Medicine. You see it's trademarked. So who owns the trademark on the phrase, exercise is medicine? It's the Coca-Cola company. This is Governor Sonny Perdue.
The correct response. Well done. Yes.
So he announces in 2009 Exercise is Medicine Month. This is Sonny Perdue, Governor of Georgia. And Coca-Cola had funded not just a few papers, they'd funded thousands of scientific papers. The entire scientific body of literature that says that essentially you can outrun a healthy diet, all of it is funded by Coca-Cola. And it is a true conspiracy. It was done behind closed doors, covertly, and it was an investigative reporter from the New York Times who revealed it. So this is an analysis done by my colleagues at the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So exercise is very, very good for you. We have a pandemic of inactivity. When it comes to pandemic obesity, inactivity is not, we could argue it's 1 to 10% of the problem. I negotiate, but it's 90% of the problem of excess weight is food.
7 minutes in, you got your first gasp. That's perfect.
That's good,
well
yeah.
Done. Yeah, very good.
We'll come back to Coca-Cola.
Yeah, okay, yes. Willpower.
So
and also I want to know about what happened in 1975.
So we can destroy the willpower argument. Many people in this room will believe that weight is primarily to do with willpower as a function. So the simplest way of destroying this is to look at the graphs of weight gain in the United States. So this is population obesity. This is the white population in the States, but the graphs look exactly the same for black and Hispanic groups. So this is CDC data. And you can see the different lines for different age groups, and the graphs are for men and women. So fairly flat until 1975, and then from 1975 on, we see an inflection point. And there's an identical inflection point for men, women, all ages, black, white, and Hispanic groups. Now, it's not reasonable to say, in my opinion, that older black men and young white women and middle-aged Hispanic people of both sexes all lost moral responsibility at exactly the same time in 1975. That's absurd. What happened was a change in the food environment.
And in Irresistible, we've got a clip now, haven't we, which is the first clip we're going to show you from your new feature-length documentary. This is a sort of, it gets to the heart of what changed.
You're about to see. Well, look, let's let Howard Moskowitz explain what happened.
Who's Howard Moskowitz?
You're about to see him. He's going to explain what happened in 1975. So let's see that we can play the clip. Good afternoon.
Amazing.
So what happened in 1975 was essentially Howard Moskowitz. He was the Magnificent that he talks about there. It was amazing.
Right, you make a parallel, don't you, between essentially where we are today with ultra-processed food, with where we were with smoking in the 50s and 60s. The sort of parallels of marketing, the parallels of that bliss point.
Right, so before I go on, does anyone mind if I smoke while we do this next bit? Do you want a cigarette? Does anyone want a cigarette?
Disgusting, no, thank you.
It feels really transgressive to get cigarettes out on stage and in public, doesn't it? And if you look at this pack, they happen to be Lucky Strikes, but you couldn't tell what brand I was smoking. What you can see is the diseased lung on the front of the packet, and you can probably even read that smoking causes lung cancer. It's a plain package. So the smoking environment today is what we've legislated around, and it means that my 7-year-old has really never seen a packet of cigarettes. She may have seen a packet in a park. She hardly sees people smoke. She's never seen one in a shop. She's never seen an advertisement for a pack of cigarettes. She watches sport on the television, doesn't see them. So that compare that to the smoking environment when you and I grew up. I remember people smoking on planes. You and I would have got the train out there together, smoking on the train. We'd be having a cigarette now. You would all be smoking. That was the 1960s. That's where we are now with food. So my kids are saturated in marketing and opportunities to buy. There's essentially no functional regulation of harmful food for children in this country. None. I would go so far as to say none.
Right, so do you want to, at this point, just tell us a little bit about how you came to understand that ultra-processed food is central to obesity, and also, well, define UPF for us?
So it was making a program called What Are We Feeding Our Kids? And we approached this program, I approached it saying, well, obesity, particularly child obesity, the program I think was originally sort of called Child Obesity, or the truth about child obesity. And we approached it saying, well, it's very complicated. It's to do with urban planning and society and genetics and culture and, yes, food and high fat, salt, sugar and all these different problems. And then about a quarter of the way into development, Lizzie Bolton, who was a producer on the film, and Dominic Walker handed me these two papers that they had dug up. One was by a guy called Carlos Montero, and it put forward this hypothesis that processing was the really important thing about food. And the other was a paper, so that was a 2009 paper, the other was a randomized controlled trial of ultra-processed food conducted in the States by a guy called Kevin Hall. And I ignored these papers for a long time. They sat on my desk, and then Lizzie kind of urged me to read them, and they seemed to explain the entire problem. And as we delved into making the program, and I would say this is really unarguably true now, the single proximate cause of the pandemic of childhood obesity that we have in this country is the manufacturing and consumption of packaged, industrially produced foods that we formally know as ultra-processed foods. There really is only that one cause. It's not because people buy more salt and sugar.
And we've got a clip, haven't we, from that documentary with this lovely young boy in Lancaster.
This is a boy, I think, he speaks for himself. Yeah, let's see the clip. I mean, I'm uneasy watching that now. It was an incredible documentary, and the family was so honest. I think we might hesitate before we interviewed a child living with obesity or living in a larger body. But that film created an understanding of ultra-processed food, and I have to say that was the person who brought it into sharp focus. The idea came from the producers, and the person who brought it into focus was our commissioner, Jack Goodall, who said, throughout all the mess, he said, you're making a film about ultra-processed food, like just make the film about that. And that is really what kind of catalysed then a podcast and very much was the nucleus of the book. And
there was you met some other people in Leicester, didn't you? And it didn't sort of make it into the documentary, but that about the food environment, about the heavily marketed UPF was really profound to you, wasn't it?
So you and I suspect we pay for our Spotify accounts, we may subscribe to our YouTube, we subscribe to our television, and we spend time in environments that aren't heavily advertised to, in all kinds of different ways. We may not use public transport very often. The kids that we met in Leicester, as we stood at the clock tower, they point, we were within sight of 3 Greggs, I think, and there was every single fast food chain around us. And they showed me the receipts from when they buy stationery for school, have McDonald's discount vouchers. They get texts at 11 o'clock at night from fast food chains offering them delivery options. So, and all of their Spotify and all of their YouTube is saturated in junk food marketing. Their computer games are paid for, their Wi-Fi is at McDonald's. So that is the food environment where everything, the common spaces are controlled by the food company.
So you've got some examples of UPF. I think let's get into it, because I think I want for you to explain, because I think that, look, you're obviously elbow deep into this, but I think still, for a lot of people, we're still trying to understand. When we did a Zoom the other day to talk about coming here, the first thing I did was, like, before you started on, let me just go and get me chunky Waitrose, fish fingers, my haddock ones out of the freezer, which I did, and I said, tell me if this isn't ultra-processed, because they're the posh ones. And I was just like, look, because I was like, come on, I was like, because I was my son's dinner that night, and I was like, oh, well, let me just check it. It probably isn't. Because I'd read it, and I'd read your book, and I was like, oh, it's fine. And then you said, oh, it's got a spice extract in, or something. And you're like, oh, so that does mean it's processed. Why? Why? You know, like, it's so irritating. Like, it's irritating to me. So it must be, so for that family, you know, for families, it's so, like...
It's really hard, and it is...
stressful.
It's worth saying that the definition of ultra-processed food is one of the most sophisticated, data-driven definitions in science, but it is incredibly long. So, if we look at the sort of range of products, there's stuff that we know is ultra-processed, and we sort of guess it was. Yeah, get it out. We'll put it away again. So this 9-paragraph definition has lots of elements to it, but the working definition is, broadly, if a product contains an ingredient that you don't find in a domestic kitchen, it's probably ultra-processed. So we've got the cocoa pops here: rice, sugar, glucose syrup, fat-reduced cocoa powder, cocoa mass, this, and flavourings. We don't, flavourings are a cosmetic additive. In the case of the Pringles, we've got maltodextrin, emulsifier E471, colourings. They're ultra-processed.
Oh, yum.
But central, and this was your question. So we looked at your fancy fish fingers, and they only had this one funky ingredient, the spice extract. At home we use spices, not spice extract, so they qualify as ultra-processed if we were studying them. So everyone obsesses about the additives, but there's another element to the definition, which is that ultra-processed foods must be marketed, and they must be produced for the purpose of profit, and they are produced by transnational corporations. So even if you buy flavouring and colouring and xanthan gum at home, which you can do, you cannot ultra-process, because the purpose of the food is to generate not just profit, but financialised growth. It's to generate more and more money. And that's the genius that Howard Moskowitz explains, is the way the processing isn't so much about the ingredients, it's that testing method where they make 45 different kinds of ragu and find the bliss point that means that you cannot stop eating.
And the point is that, from what I've read and what you've told me, and what we'll see in the film, is that the chemicals, essentially, are cheaper than the food. And so therefore, that's why UPF is cheap.
There are only two ways to make money out of food, basically. It's to hammer down the price of ingredients and to make people eat more and more and more of it. So you never use butter if you can possibly use palm fat. And if forest fires in Indonesia change the price of palm fat, then you put in sunflower fat instead. So bread is the kind of emblematic example, because whilst lots of this stuff, we kind of know that chocolate-covered breakfast cereal may not be healthy, but there's lots of ultra-processed food that's sold to us as healthy. So it's basically axiomatic. If there's a health claim on the packet, it will be an ultra-processed product. So we know that the kind of layers to explain are, we know the harm the food is doing. We have fantastic amounts of epidemiological evidence that this food is driving a pandemic of disease. So this isn't a program based on one study. This is a program based now on 32 meta-analyses. So we have almost 100 of the kind of studies that linked tobacco to smoking. We also have randomized control trials, but we also have a very deep understanding of the properties of food that harm us. And the most important properties, the things we understand the best, are the texture and the energy density. So if you look at these breads, this weird brown envelope here. This is a loaf of sourdough, and I can really squeeze it hard. This is hard bread. Now, if we give any of you an equal number of calories of this bread and the emulsified foam that passes for supermarket bread, this is the 99% of the bread we eat in the UK is.
And you're not being hyperbolic, by the way, when you say emulsified foam. That literally is what you think bread is.
So this is a mixture of low-quality flour, back-added wheat protein, and an emulsifier called E472E, which is, and I'm going to look at, I want to see the BSL, we talked about this beforehand. It stands for mono and diacetyl tartaric acid esters of mono and diglycerides fatty acids. That is thank you so much. So this bread is not, there's a campaign that this sort of bread should not be called bread. But the fact that it's soft means you can eat this approximately 3 times quicker, and this bread has the energy density, the number of calories per gram, it's higher than a McDonald's Big Mac or another fast food burger. So that energy density and the softness means that you consume these kind of products more quickly than your body's mechanisms can say, I'm done, I'm full.
Yes, so the hormone that tells you you are full, leptin, won't be released when you're eating Hovis at the same rate as it will do when you're eating. So when you're eating sourdough, it'll tell you you're full.
It's very good to name the hormone. Well, there are a number of hormones, but yes, leptin is part of the issue. There's a whole cascade of signals from the gut. Some of them are endocrine hormones, some of them are nerve signals. But if you eat food very quickly, because it's easy to chew and absorb, you get the calories. And that's just one of the.
And when you say the financialization of food, you literally mean this, don't you? How do we get people to eat more of this as quickly as possible and therefore buy as much as possible? Right. We've got a clip, haven't we, about the whole immersive experience, the softness, the popping of the Pringles, all of that is what draws us in and keeps us there.
So we're going to see Barry Smith, who is a friend of mine, and he's a philosopher, and he spent years and years working for food companies, helping them with the sensory side, not just of the food, but the packaging. The packaging is part of the ultra process.
And Barry's in Irresistible.
Yeah, he's
okay.
Yeah,
let's take a look.
So the word processing kind of misleads you because you think it's about the kind of mixing of the additives and the ingredients. But ultra processing is just a set of tools and technologies for product development of any product to create an addictive or a quasi-addictive experience. And we see it in food, and we see it in lots of other things.
Let's talk about addiction to this kind of food. How do you know if you are?
So when we diagnose addiction in medicine, we don't put people in scanners or do a blood test. We ask a set of fairly simple questions. So I won't ask these questions to the room, but I want you to consider them. These are very personal questions, and I know there will be people living with addictions in the audience. Are there any foods? So if the answer to these are yes, think about what foods they are. Are there any foods that cause you physical, social, or psychological problems? Foods that you know are harming you, and yet you keep eating them anyway. And do you, just to hammer through the questions on the slide, have you ever tried and failed to stop eating these foods? Do you ever feel like you're not in control? Do you experience cravings, and do you experience guilt? And we know that somewhere between 10 and 20% of people answer yes to these questions, and the foods that they feel addicted to are always ultra-processed products. So we never become addicted to our own domestic cooking, kind of no matter how good at it we are.
No. And
Henry Dimbleby claims he's addicted to his own chocolate brownies, very immodestly. I mean, he worked in a Michelin-star restaurant. He may be, but most of us don't.
And there's a really interesting thing that you've found about people being put into brain scanners to discover that ice cream makes you happy.
So you can do tasting panels, but if you really, really want to design food that is addictive, then you turn to a neuroscientist. So this is I should say these clips are all raw. The doc isn't finished yet, so you're seeing quite raw stuff. But this is a neuroscientist called Francis McGlone. This is a clip from the doc.
I actually find the whole brain scan thing quite sinister. Like, I just find it's like, I would never think that when people are producing what we think is food, which I now realise is mostly chemicals and not real food, is that if it said wood chippings and bits of plastic somehow do something to your brain that make you feel happy, they just put it in there.
Yes.
Regardless of the effect. Like, I just find it sinister.
Welcome to late capitalism. I mean, can I ask what you expected from a transnational corporation doing anything? I mean, the misunderstanding is about the function of the corporation. And I'm not anti-capitalist. The film is not a critique of capitalism at all, in fact. It's seeking to reveal that as an incentive structure.
Right. Why? Well, okay, so we know why they're doing it. We know that they're doing it now, as your film will reveal. It's about making money. It's just about making money. It's just a product to them. It could be anything. And that is true when you go back into history, isn't it? Because when we talked a bit about smoking and the smoking environment and the food environment and the parallels there. It's not just parallels, they are linked.
To understand ultra-processed products, you have to understand their ancestry, and we were incredibly lucky to get someone who was there as a kind of central figure at the moment when the ancestry of food changed. So let's watch. This is a.
Get ready to gasp.
I think this is. When I saw this clip, I couldn't believe this guy spoke to us. So this is a guy called Steve Parish, and he'll speak for himself.
So tobacco buys food and uses chemicals that they've already got in their supply chain to then just transfer it into food. I mean, it's this
Flavour molecules and marketing techniques. The food industry and the tobacco industry aren't similar. From 1985 to about the year 2000, the biggest food companies in the world were simultaneously the biggest tobacco companies in the world.
And just to be clear, when I saw that clip, I thought the first bit of Steve Parish, the sort of the archive clip, was from a lot earlier than it actually was. So I was like, did he know that cancer was linked to cigarettes? And you said that clip was from when?
It's from the 90s.
The 90s.
Yeah.
Right? When it was clear. So the parallel that's being made is that now that we know all the science is proving beyond doubt in your mind, and in the minds of many others, that UPF is literally linked to cancers and obesity, and yet the food giants will actively deny that that is true. In the same way that Steve Parish actively denied the science at the time in smoking.
Just as they are using this very, very well-rehearsed tobacco playbook, which was adopted by the fossil fuel industry to push against regulation, so the food companies are doing exactly the same thing. Yes.
And are there any examples of people at the top of the food industry who have got a soul?
So what?
Or a heart?
So there are
or children? Or something?
No, they're all evil today. I mean, in interviewing, hundreds of people for the book, and for many years over the films, I've spoken to many, many people of the food industry. I've only ever met one person who I really believed was cynical, by which I mean they knew what they were doing was bad and wrong, and they were doing it deliberately to cause harm. Almost everyone is a good actor. The problem is that the companies aren't in control of their business model, and that line comes from someone very senior at BlackRock, one of the biggest investment funds in the world. Because I was saying to them, why can't people at these big food companies just, decide to make a little bit less money? They make an enormous amount of money. And the answer is very straightforward, because they're owned primarily by institutional investors. So a lot of my research is now done with economists, and political scientists, not with nutritional scientists. And so we did an analysis last year where we asked, who owns the companies and how do they spend their money? Because if you go on the website, you can do it now, go on the homepage of any of the biggest food companies, go on Nestle, Danone, Coca-Cola, you would believe that Coca-Cola was an international charity dedicated exclusively to cleaning up plastic, reducing carbon emissions, creating improved conditions for children in the workplace, and bringing women into the workplace and treating them fairly, even as they are the world's biggest plastic polluter. So we just said, when they spend money, do they spend it cleaning up plastic? And the answer is no. They do share buybacks and pay out the money in dividends. So the companies, and the reason they do that is because institutional investors require them to do it. So this is just the reality of the financial system. You can complain about it, but you might as well complain about gravity. So the argument we were making is if the companies aren't in control, they need regulation. And the best example was, I think we've got a slide actually, this is Emmanuel Faber. He was the CEO of Danone, and I think he sincerely wanted to make Danone a better company, to reduce carbon emissions, improve their...
Danone make?
So Danone, you probably know them. Oh, Danone.
Yeah, that's
them. They make yogurts, Actimel, infant formula, a wide range of dairy products. They're one of the world's biggest food companies. If they were a country, they'd be in the top half of countries globally by GDP. They're enormous. And Faber wanted to change it. He wanted to improve the health of the portfolio, reduce carbon emissions, improve biodiversity, and turn Danone into an entirely different company. He wanted to turn it into a social enterprise. And so a group of activist investors, who we normally think about trying to do good, but activist investors also do other things. So Bluebell Capital ousted Faber and his team because the share price had tanked compared to their major rival Nestle. And once Faber was ousted, Danone went back up to parity with Nestle. So the owners of the companies are your and my pension, they will be your pensions, and so the company's purpose is to generate growth and money for the pension funds. So if Faber can't change things at Danone, no one can change these companies other than governments.
I was surprised when you mentioned in your book Pret, because I thought, oh, there's a good one.
Right. I thought Pret have been the focus of a lot of attention because they were briefly owned by McDonald's, which upset everyone. They are really, the way I think of them personally, is if you're a big conglomerate, you have to own some coffee, because coffee is an amazing way of making money, right? It's costs less than pennies. It's a cup of brown water with caffeine in it. It's addictive, it costs nothing to make, and everyone wants it. Coke have Costa, Nestle have Starbucks, and JAB Holdings, which is a big German financial conglomerate, their coffee arm is Pret. So coffee is just part of the diversified investment portfolio of a big privately owned German conglomerate. They're not really a food shop in any means.
So if they want to carry... Okay, fine. So is there such a thing... I'm just going slightly off track here because I want to mention... Is there such a thing as healthy UPF at all? Because, look, got Belvita here, right? It's got 3 real blueberries on the packaging. Now, I know that means there must be real blueberries in it.
So without looking at the ingredients list, we know this is UPF because there is a health claim on the pack and because it's made by...
Well, you know that. The rest of us didn't know that.
Well, there's a number of working definitions of UPF that work really well. Almost all UPF has excessive amounts of fat, salt and sugar. So one of the things the food companies want to do is to go, no, processing isn't important. It's all about nutrients. And if we take out the sugar, we can turn an unhealthy product into a healthy product.
Right.
The truth is, I've done a piece of modelling with the Pan American Health Organization, part of WHO, and we can show that around 99% of UK ultra-processed food has excessive amounts of either saturated fat, salt or sugar. So the distinction is somewhat academic. This, by mass, is 21% sugar. So, you should consume no more than 5% of your calories from sugar, and this has 4 times that amount. It's also, low in fibre, extremely high in salt, and it contains lots of non-domestic ingredients like something called isomaltulose, and there's a humectant and lots of emulsifiers. So this is an ultra-processed product. Almost all the food made by transnational food corporations has to be ultra-processed because it's about creating shelf life, driving down prices, creating intellectual property, and driving excess consumption. So there are a few things. Nestle makes some shredded wheat, Danone makes some milk, some yogurt, but broadly the only way you can make money from food is through ultra-processing. That is the purpose.
And so when, ministers and so on will say, Good Morning Britain, you challenge them on, we've got the sugar tax, and we're working really closely with the food manufacturers to see what they can do to make their food healthier. And we've got the traffic light system. So, that, I know we're going to talk about something else about packaging a little bit later.
Well, can I talk about traffic lights? Let's do traffic lights, and then I want to come, because you're actually going to get to do this, the minister, so I want to...
I know.
But let me divert into traffic lights. So we do have a labelling system in the UK called the traffic light system, which some of you may have seen. There it is on a can of full sugar Coca-Cola, and you can see that full sugar Coke is 3/4 healthy. It gets 3 green traffic lights. It has 1 red one that you can't see because the label is red. Now the traffic light system is voluntary, okay? So Coke don't have to put it on their can or their bottle. And a clue that it may not be very effective is that Coca-Cola do put the voluntary traffic lights on the bottle. Diet Coca-Cola, a mixture of phosphoric acid, non-nutritive sweeteners known to cause cancer and flavourings, is 4 green traffic lights. It's the healthiest thing you can buy. They haven't put the traffic lights on this. The Belvita doesn't have traffic. They've put the colours on. They've taken the colours off because it would get reds and then trying to sell it as healthy.
Cocoa Pops. 2 green. That's crazy.
2 greens and 2 oranges. Now, that might lead you as a parent or as a consumer to think that Cocoa Pops was a healthy product. But according to our I'm sorry, I'm a bit technical about this because I'm so in the weeds of this, but we have really good UK dietary guidance established in law in the early 1990s that sets thresholds for salt and sugar and fat. And they're very clear, and they're very good, and they're very well evidenced. Okay? Cocoa Pops should have, in order to get a green for sugar, it should have no more than 5% of its calories for sugar. It gets an orange. In fact, 17% of the calories in Cocoa Pops come from sugar. It's got 3 times the guideline amount. It should have a red light for sugar. It's got an orange because the traffic light thresholds have nothing to do with our agreed guidance. The traffic lights are voluntary. They help put a halo on ultra-processed products. They are all but meaningless. And no one knows what to do with a green and orange traffic light anyway. Do you go? Do you stop? What does it mean? It's not interpretable. So what we need is a different, one of my big asks, I suppose. I'm not a campaigner. This is not a campaigning film, but the evidence is very clear that if you're interested in improving rates of diet-related disease, you do need to label food in a different way. We'll come to that. Hold on. Your minister's question. So ministers say all food companies are on a journey. Okay, this is the standard language, and you will have heard this. The cigarette companies are on a journey. Philip Morris is working toward a smoke-free world. That is their strapline, creating a smoke-free world, even as they sell more cigarettes than any other company on earth. So they're all on a journey. They all want to be partners for change. And since the 90s, successive governments on both sides of the aisle have partnered with the food industry. And what we've seen is an explosion of children going from having a 5% obesity rate at the age of 10 to having a 25% rate of obesity at the age of 10. There's no other condition that we tolerate, an environmental condition, we tolerate with a rate of a quarter of children at the age of 10, and it's causing stunting. So they cannot be partners in change. They will always seek to dilute and delay all policy, because effective policy has to direct people toward the food that they don't make, and it has to make people buy less of the food that they do make. And so they cannot be partners in change.
And as I was reading your book, I mean, you named so many different companies. I thought, does Chris have any friends left in the world? I don't know if there's anybody left.
Friends for other reasons, but
it's also interesting because you say that these companies can't be partners in change, and we'll talk about that. But they also go to great lengths to change the headlines, to change what scientists will actually say in public. And you, after the book came out, experienced this firsthand.
So there were 2 things. When the book was published, I kind of imagined myself getting this day in court with the CEO, a bit like the Senate hearings on tobacco. I'd get my day in court with the CEO of one of the big food companies. And then when the book was published, I suddenly became very worried about this because I realised they would have a much better lawyer than I did. And then things went great guns for a few months, and the book was more or less celebrated. And then in August, an email arrived from McDonald's, and this is a real email here. I put it too small, but I thought, oh great, this is the moment of trouble. This is where I'm really going to be dumped in it. But the email was not the email I was expecting, so it opened up in a rather friendly way, and it said, we're putting together a nutrition workshop in October at our headquarters in Chicago with our senior leadership team and stakeholders. And then they invited me to come to the workshop, and then they proposed they were keen for an inspirational, thought-provoking, yet realistic ambassador on food and nutrition. So McDonald's, far from trying to create legal trouble for me, wanted to bring me in, fly me to their headquarters and make me an ambassador on food. So I said, well, look, I'd love to. Who would not want to go and meet the board of McDonald's? But obviously I said, I'll pay for my own flight. It won't cost you the price of a burger. I'll foot the bill for the whole thing. And the offer just went away like that. Just disappeared. They didn't answer any emails from them, which puzzled me. So then, every week, invitations from food manufacturers and retailers, supermarkets would arrive in my inbox, offering me really life-changing amounts of money to go and speak to them. So I got an offer from one of the big food companies to speak to them on Zoom for an hour or so, and the starting offer was £20,000. My agent, somewhere in the audience, my agent can get any £20,000 offer to £40,000 within about 10 minutes. you know it's going to be, it's a huge amount of money for me. Yeah. So anyway, the contract arrived. What I decided to do, so I'll confess this, I won't ever take money from anyone who makes any food at all. But I thought, well, it's so much money, I could direct it to a non-food charity. I work with a migrants charity, I run a clinic for asylum seekers, so it would really change some lives. So I won't ever accept it, we'll bounce it through the agency, I won't be conflicted, it'll be all good. The contract arrives, and this is what's buried in the middle of 5 pages of dense legal text. The supplier, that's me, warrants, represents and undertakes that it, me, shall not undertake make any statement or otherwise conduct myself in a manner as shall or may, in the reasonable opinion of the food company, disparage this food company or its customers or its products or its services or bring the company name into dispute. Now, I do not have a team of lawyers. I have an eagle-eyed agent of Mirador Miranda and the team there read this and spotted this. Now, I'm sure we could have got this clause taken out. I'm sure we could have got the throughout the universe in perpetuity bits at the top of the contract removed and the term reduced. But the point is their ambition is to create a conflict of interest. Because even if they don't literally put my silence in writing, the second I take a penny, if I call out that food company, they get to go, oh, you didn't mind taking our money earlier this year. So conflicts work in very, very soft and subtle ways. And so that's why my rule has been absolute. So the food company try and embrace me, and there was no pushback from them. But then in September of last year, you may have read these headlines, there was a press conference. And in every single major newspaper, there was a headline like, ultra-processed food, not always bad for you, scientists say, it can be good for you, 10 ultra-processed foods that are healthy. A New Scientist was the clearest. Calls for people to stop eating ultra-processed foods have been dismissed by officials at the UK Food Standards Agency and other health bodies. So there appeared to be a UK government scientist press conference calling the whole thing hype, and all my colleagues and my friends and everyone sent these pieces to me going, are you wrong? Are you making all this up? Is this just hype? So what it turned out is this wasn't actually a government press conference. The press conference was hosted by something called the Science Media Centre. Now this is a sort of media clearinghouse, and if you read about science in the UK press and you see a quote from a scientist, it is very, very likely the quote has come from the SMC website where they sort of aggregate thoughts from scientists to make life easy for journalists. Who pays the Science Media Centre? Well, they have some food sponsors, including Procter & Gamble, Nestle, and Food Drink Europe is a big food association that's funded by, amongst others, Coca-Cola and McDonald's. So it's an industry-funded press conference. And what none of the press pieces reported was that of the 5 scientists that spoke, 4 of them had declared conflicts of interest with the food industry. One had been the senior scientist at Nestle for many years, like the most senior, the head of the Nestle Science Service. So we had industry-funded scientists speaking in an industry-funded conference. None of this was reported until the British Medical Journal did an investigation unpicking the entire
And the
thing.
British Medical Journal is not funded by any.
So the British, I worked with the BMJ for a very long time, and they have very, very aggressively rejected funding from all food tobacco. They've got a very good conflict.
The British Nutrition Foundation.
So
sounds independent and trustworthy.
it really does, doesn't it?
Yes.
So you would think like the British Lung Foundation would not be funded by tobacco. This is our leading food charity. Okay, they advise government, they produce policy papers, they speak to the public. These are some of their members who pay their bills. They're majority funded by the food industry. So in the UK, the situation is our press, the scientists who speak in the press, their research is funded by the food industry, and they are cleared through the Science Media Centre funded by the food industry, and they work with our major food charity, the British Nutrition Foundation, funded by the food industry. But most alarmingly, our Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, which did supply someone to that press conference, half of the members of SACN have declared conflicts of interest with companies like and including Coca-Cola. So the entire food environment, whether you're getting your information from the box or from the Government Advisory Committee or the charities or the press, everything is controlled by the food industry.
Well, I might as well give up and say it done now. I mean, where is the hope? Because I feel like, I'm going right back to one of the first clips we played, that family in Lancaster, she's trying her best, a mum, the dad says we've got a budget, we can't really afford all this, the other food, it costs me £30 more a week if we've tried to be healthier, we've tried to buy whole foods and so on, but my kids need feeding. Give us some hope here, because it does feel like after speaking to you and after reading your book, I felt like going into the supermarket, felt like I was being assaulted by the aisles. I was like, oh my God, all I can eat is German rye bread for the rest of my life. That's the only thing I can possibly eat, right? And I literally bought it. I've never eaten it before. I bought it that day. Chris came on the Lorraine show and that's when we met. And after that, I was just like, what am I going to do now? Like, I just, going to the supermarket feels like you're treading on landmines everywhere. Like, everything is screaming UPF. So, right. Who needs to change? Because if you're saying it's not the individual's fault for obesity, and we're trying our best, but we almost can't wriggle away from it enough, because wherever we turn, it's there. What is the solution here? What is going to solve it? In the same way that the smoking environment did change, can the food environment really change all of this?
So just as they are using their tobacco playbook to market and sell us harmful, addictive food, we can use the tobacco control playbook. Now, a big part of tobacco control, the reason we're not all sitting here smoking, was a thing called tobacco industry denormalisation. There was a huge public health effort to go, this isn't a normal industry. They're selling a thing that they know is killing you, and they knew it was killing us in the 30s, they'd done that research, and yet they sell it anyway, and they market it, they disguise it, they're evil, and that was a huge part of helping people to quit smoking, was exposing all that. What the World Health Organization did yesterday is they published, WHO Europe, published this document, joining together tobacco, food and beverages, gambling, alcohol and fossil fuels, along with a few other industries, and saying commerciogenic disease, corporate determinants of health, are the leading cause of death in Europe, and we have to regulate these industries. And so what's proving really powerful is roping together food, gambling, alcohol, things we all agree about tobacco, alcohol and gambling we're sort of on board with, and saying that food are using the same strategies. That's how we're going to see regulation, by exposing the financial drivers. And I think just out of interest, in this room, I will ask for a show of hands. Who here thinks that there is some validity to the claim? Put up your hand if you think there is some validity to the claim that some people can be addicted to ultra-processed food. Do you think so? So there is now, these ideas have enormous currency and traction. So on the one hand, we have a single company like Nestle, where the consumer-facing marketing budget is around 3 times the entire World Health Organization operating budget annually. Okay, WHO is trying to do all kinds of things, including stop the next pandemic. But on the other hand, we have truth and science and reality. And I think people in the UK, the reason the book is successful, the reason the What Are We Feeding Our Kids was so successful, is because we are at a moment where people feel maximally gaslit by the food industry. For 3 decades, we've been getting bigger and shorter, like noticeably shorter, and nothing has worked. And so I think people are ready for it.
But the film, and I know you've looked at it, there are countries from France to Argentina to Colombia, I think, and other places, that have actually opened, the government level, have acknowledged the dangers of ultra-processed food,
right,
and have health campaigns to encourage people to stop eating ultra-processed food.
So I'm used to talking very defensively in the UK. So one of my strategies is to go, I don't care if you believe me about ultra-processed food. Let's talk about salt, fat and sugar. Because if we clamp down on salt, fat and sugar and put warning labels on food using just those 3 things, we know we can put a warning label on 95 to 99% of UK ultra-processed.
Should we have a look at the Colombia packaging?
So this is
found interesting.
The approach that's been adopted in South America. This is the labelling system in Mexico and Argentina. It's very similar in Chile and Colombia. So part of the film, we go to Colombia. Now, what happened in South and Central America is after the North American Free Trade Agreement, there was this tidal wave of American food. Ultra-processed food is really another way of saying American food. Some of it's made in Switzerland, and I'm ashamed to say that in front of my American friends, because America also has some wonderful food, but this is the American diet. And it was very, very clear to the scientists, particularly in Brazil, the products that were causing the problem. And it was a Brazilian team, and it's so important. It was a team made up primarily of women, a team of scientists from the Global South that did this work. And that is a really, really important thing to acknowledge in this science, that the world leaders come from Brazil and South and Central America. So it was very, very clear the products that had to be regulated, and so they have been very sophisticated in doing this. So in Chile, they started trying to bring in this legislation in 2004-ish. By 2014, they got these black octagons on the pack. And one of the most, I have two first steps. One is to deconflict the government committee. No one on the government committee needs to have financial conflicts of interest with the food industry. Now, I've floated this in public, and already the government committee have responded and said, well, there isn't enough talent to staff the government committee. Now, these are the same arguments that we use to exclude women, people of colour, minority groups from positions of power for decades. They have no validity. They're incredible people that could start. And anyway, the committee's been completely fucking ineffective because, I'm sorry, I mean, you know, to say that this second has had any impact, while SACN has supervised the growth of children from 5 to 25% rate of obesity, how can you say this is a committee with any power or efficacy? It wouldn't matter if there were just children on the committee. If they were deconflicted, they would do something more sensible. They would regulate the food industry. You know, you put Lyra on the committee, my 7-year-old, and she'd do a better job.
Happy birthday to her, by the way.
Happy birthday.
It's her birthday.
So So deconflict the government committee. There is no reason someone should have a relationship with the industry. But the second thing is warning labels on food. Now, people say, so my colleagues from Mexico will say, well, Chris, we've got the warning labels on. I gave a talk in the States the other day, there was a guy there from Mexico, and he said, we've got the warning labels, and we still have very high rates of obesity. This is true, but without the warning labels, you can achieve nothing, because the warning labels forced you to delineate the category of food subject to the other regulations. So, using the Chilean system, they use exactly the same thresholds for salt and sugar that we have in this country. Cocoa Pops would get 2 big black octagons. They would have to be above the logo and bigger than it. And once a food in Chile has an octagon, it can't have a cartoon character, it can't have a health claim, a source of fiber. There are something like, the last time I counted, there are 12 health claims on a pack of Cocoa Pops. All of them would have to disappear. Cocoa Monkey would disappear. Some of the bright writing might disappear. And we could consider progressive taxation on the products with the most octagons. So the octagons are what tell you the food you can't sell to children, you can't market, you can't have on a particular, you can't have on a till at the supermarket. They are your starting step for all of those tobacco control measures.
Okay, look, there's so much more we could talk about. I want to open it up to the floor. There's roving mics. If you've got questions, we've got a little bit of time at the end. If you've got questions, please put your hands up for Chris. There's a question there. If I can bring that down. Thank you.
Thank you. Huge inspirational stuff. Thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. I'm worried, though, that someone's going to come and take your kneecaps out, because these industries seem to generate a huge amount of revenue from the things you're talking about. Your message is obviously a threat to them, and they've tried legal means and so on. Have you ever felt seriously threatened? Because one of the talks this weekend is about the threat of being a documentary filmmaker who does raise difficult issues and does it very publicly. Your name's on it, Chris.
What was your name?
Oh, my name's Alex.
Alex, it's a lovely question because it's quite a flattering question. So what I'm very clear about is I have become wrongly the sort of poster boy for ultra-processed food control in this country. The reason that's wrong is I'm not an affected person, okay? I'm a tourist in the world of food regulation. I work with some of the people who in the late 70s, and I saw my friend Patty last night, since the late 70s, she's been campaigning against the companies marketing formula illegally around the world. Okay, some people have been living in this, and my colleagues in South and Central America have received death threats and have been beaten up and are taken into dark alleys. What I know is that I can put all this down tomorrow, and I can go and hopefully do a bit more work at the BBC. I can do some stuff on Radio 4. I can write a book about a different thing. You know, I have enormous privilege that allows me to dip in and out. We have just ended a legal threat from 2 of the biggest food companies because of the extra chapter in the paperback. And what I will say is, even from this position of privilege, I find it incredibly stressful when you get these legal threats, because even the Penguin lawyers don't have the pockets of a big food company. So it is stressful, but I feel like I'm I'm very privileged that it doesn't threaten me as much as.
Let's take another. I don't actually know what time this session finishes. I'm so sorry. Where's Matthias? What time is it?
I think we've got 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, fine. Sorry. Got another question there.
Hello, Chris. Thank you. That was a really good job. I'm just going to ask this, and not on my DocFest hat, but as my cooking mum hat, if that's okay. I've followed this research for quite a long time, been doing the Zoe eating plan, things like that. I find that there's a lot of information about what to avoid, and like you were saying, you go into the supermarket, you just don't know what you can go for, it's quite complicated. Do you know of any tools or any online communities or places where, for example, local food suppliers, people trying to make a difference to their menus and their cafes, things like that, could register to sort of make a more positive, come and eat this, rather than, for God's sake, don't eat that, kind of?
So, there are three answers to that. One is, I will never ever talk about the food that you should eat. I hope there's no advice in the book. There is zero advice in the documentary. It's not for me to tell anyone to eat. I am about changing the food environment. There is a website called Open Food Facts that will tell you if a product is ultra-processed and is pretty useful. But really, I want to celebrate, and I should have said this at the beginning, the Sheffield City Council, being in Sheffield is very special because by coincidence, the Sheffield City Council and their public health team, led by Greg Fells with Amanda Pritchard and Liz Harris, they have essentially the most kind of aggressive and progressive route to regulating the food environment. And so they are working with all these different partners in the environment. You know, the university, food charities, not food companies, but they have an incredibly sophisticated approach that is driving down the marketing and making real food available and just doing something really incredible. What they are actually, they're revealing two things. First of all, that local government can do remarkable things, but also that if you try and change the system, Big Food employs King's Councils to come and sue local government. And you know, the power that people like Greg and his team are up against is unbelievable. But yes, there are, so in Sheffield alone, you can look at the Food Partnership, and the City Council is just doing incredible things. So, I'm sorry, I should have acknowledged them.
Yeah, no, you're good. I'm glad you did. There's a question.
I think some of the team may even be here, but if they are, then, you know.
Freedom of the City of Sheffield request, right. There we go. Question.
Hi, Chris. That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. My question is, UPF, is the problem just calories, or is it also something to do with what age all those calories are blended together?
That's a lovely question. It is absolutely certain that weight gain is only to do with calorie intake. The way that UPF interacts with that is that it allows or forces you to eat more calories. So what Kevin Hall showed in his experiment, and there are many, many other ways of demonstrating this, is that given nutritionally equivalent meals, people just eat more UPF. And so you will notice the standard UK lunch, you know, sandwich from wherever, pack of crunchy stuff and a can of soda pop. You never leave a couple of chips in the pack and the crust of the sandwich, do you? You're like licking out, you know, you buy a ready meal lasagna for two, one person will be scooping out the pack. So this is food that forces you to eat more calories and bypasses your appetite mechanisms.
And of course, if people watch the documentary that went with the book, not necessarily this one, you know, there is a change in your neural pathways that appears to be permanent once you did 4 weeks of UPF in your own life.
Yes, the food interferes. I mean, we showed this brilliantly in What Are We Feeding Our Kids, which is not weirdly available. And that reminds me, I need to ask why you can't still watch that somewhere. But
sounds sinister to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on. Yes.
Yeah, it interferes very deeply with your biology because people like Howard Moskowitz have been working on that since 1975. Yes. Because
they've been doing brain scans to make us eat more, so therefore it's bound to change our brains.
It's not. A lot of PhDs have gone into food that you can't. But it is. So calories are important. But if you eat your calories from real food, because they're not energy dense and they're not soft and they're not manipulated, so you eat more of them, you just eat fewer calories. That is.
I'm not sure if we've got any more time. Have we got any more time for a You've got 5 minutes. Great. Okay. Do you want to bring the mic down to the front. Can I just ask for dinner? Have you got any ultra-processed food in your life anymore? And does anyone invite you to dinner or pick?
So I was like,
Well, you're a complete sort of loner these days. Social
I work
pariah.
so hard not to judge people. I always do not. Sincerely, I don't care what any of you eat. I really, really don't. I want you to have a true choice. I'm kind of libertarian. I'm like, I just want you to be able to afford and have available real food, and I want the harmful food to have very big warning labels all over it to be taxed. But so my friends.
You still eat some.
So we had a big bowl at home full of junk from parties and grandparents, and I would always show it to journalists and be like, oh, like Rishi Sunak, man of the people. And it just dominated our lives. And so eventually I was like, this is just weird. Let's get. And the kids are really happy to know. If it's not there, they don't ask for it. So.
But as you say, you're privileged to be able to afford the other food.
100%. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
And my kids eat whatever they want at parties, so nothing is bad.
They do. Still let them
they have it at school. They have it at parties. Yeah, nothing's bad.
See.
I don't know if that's right or wrong. No one has a map through this.
No, I find it fascinating you say that, and it's honest of you to tell us that. Question.
Hi. Hi, thank you very much for all your work that you're doing. I'm an emergency doctor, and we have used your videos. We build healing neighborhoods around GP practices, and we actually use your education to highlight the importance of ultra-processed food, and then we taught our patients how to actually eat whole foods, and a combination of that, we have been able to reverse chronic diseases, diabetes by 55% here in Sheffield.
Oh my goodness, we've got to give that a round.
CBS down by 16.25%, so just the last year. We have been able to save £600,000 for every 400 patients who has actually learned your education. I must say, I ate on Whole Foods for £2.75 every single day as a parent who has more than 2 kids, and our benefits, that's the price. And it was totally affordable and tasty, delicious, and full of nutrition. So it's, I think it's, what do you think about the fact that actually it's possible to eat cheap and healthy? I think it's, if we eat the right grains and we educate people how to do it right and give them the tools where to buy things. For example, Ready Brek is one of the main staples right now for people on benefits. That costs £2.45 for a box, and all the nutrients are gone, right? That means it's 40p for every 100 grams. 40p. Now, if you get the whole grain, the oat groats, it's 10p per 100 grams. So you get the nutrients for 4 times less the monies.
What was your name?
Linda.
So, Linda, thank you. I mean, I want to speak to you afterwards if we can. You are right. There are certain voices that I think can be heard saying that we can make real food, healthy food affordable. I don't think I'm an appropriate voice to be saying it. I don't think anyone needs to hear another person like me on television or the radio. So I try and elevate the voices that are saying that, and particularly the people involved in the structure, people like you and people like Sheffield City Council, who are going, look, we're going to control this over here, and we're going to limit the prices. What I notice, and I think the data are robust, is that broadly what's very easy, if you're not educated about it, is that unhealthy food is cheaper in the sense that you can cook it all in a microwave. If you don't own a stovetop cooker, if you don't own Tupperware, if you don't own a deep freeze, and you can't batch cook, and energy is expensive, you can skillfully do it, but what's very easy and cheap is ultra-processed food. But can I just, I would love to speak to you again, and bravo for the work.
And just for your credit, we calculated from independent health economics, just eating the way you describe it, well, the way we shouldn't eat, just for South Yorkshire, it will have savings of £87 million. So well done. Cool.
Well, look, I mean, what's really important, this food is very, very cheap when you buy it. It's really cheap at the point of purchase. We will all pay for it. We pay for it in loss of biodiversity. We pay for it because we're having to cut down the Amazon to grow the soy and cut down forests in Indonesia for the palm. We will pay for the carbon emissions, and we will pay for the diet-related disease, which already cost, obesity alone, the they cost the UK taxpayer 100 billion a year. Cheap at the point of cost, it is unaffordably expensive later on. So yes, I mean, there's often this weird thing where something is very cost effective but immediately unaffordable, and that's why city councils are so important for dealing with this. But yeah.
And we've sort of come to the end of the session. What a great way to end the session. But ultimately, the message is, isn't it, that the individual should not be shamed and should not be blamed, because actually the responsibility is so far away from us that governments and scientists have to be brutally honest about whose pocket they're in, and governments have to be brutally thorough about whose advice they're taking, and they have to make sure that they're not being crushed down by the lobbyists, which Nestle and all these companies have endless amounts of money to control our entire environment and indeed government policy, and that has to stop. Otherwise we will never get out of this. But we did it with tobacco and we can do it with UPF.
I love you ending on the structural thing. Can I, as the final thing, you've ended on policy. What I want to say is, if anyone in this room finds that they are struggling, the people, in a sense, who feel the most shame, who feel they are to blame, the people who live with diet-related disease, and that is increasingly a huge number of us, members of my own family. Yeah. What I would assure you is it is not you. This food is engineered, as you have seen just a tiny taste of, it is engineered by geniuses. It is not your fault if you are struggling. It really is the food, and we must regulate.
Dr. Chris van Tulleken.
Oh.